All right, so thank you all again for joining me for our second session of our trustee training series. Today we are discussing the library board governance in Century Code. Again, this is very, very tailored to North Dakota libraries, so if you find yourself talking to somebody from out of state, it might be different. The LibGuide is the same as last time. There's a second little box available to access it. You can go to the website listed here on the slide, or else go to our website, click on Services for Libraries and Education, and under the cloud there is a little LibGuide hyperlink, and go ahead and scroll on down to Public Library Board of Trustees. Again, a little bit about me. I'm Abby Ebach, the Public Library Specialist at the State Library, and I do have to say that even though I love the minutia of reading Century Code, I'm not a lawyer. We are going to be talking about library law a lot today, obviously, and so anything I say is not legal advice. Please contact your local attorney for any questions that involve interpreting law. That is not something I'm allowed to do. Everything tonight is going to be primarily quoted directly from Century Code or from the Attorney General's office, or today. So I'm breaking out today into three different chunks. We have the board, a group of friendly kittens, the board meeting, and then the records. So they all really relate back to each other and influence each other. If you have any questions along the way, throw them into chat. I might say we'll get to it later, or I'll answer them on the spot. Either way, we will do our best to get your questions answered. So we're going to start off with the board. Obviously. The board of the public library is a governing board like we talked about on Tuesday. So that means they create the bylaws, rules, policies, and budgets as they relate to the library, and then make decisions about the library property and hiring a library director. That is granted in statute 403804. Today we're going to be in 403803, my heavily highlighted, if you can see that, 403803 in my copy of library law. So 403803 and 11 is what outlines the structure of the Board of Trustees. The board is required to have 5 with an asterisk. So all trustees must be residents of the city or county. That means that if you're a city library, everybody has to live within city limits. If you're a county library, the members need to be from within that county. The little asterisk is that if you are a city county or like a multi-county library system, statute dictates 5 to 11 members. Century Code also mandates that those boards have equal representation from each municipality. So 3 from each county, 3 from the city, 3 from outside of the city, whatever that structure may be that fits your specific situation. 1 trustee from each municipality of the library needs to be a member of the city council or county commission. So this is included in those 5 members. So 5 total members. This person needs to be from the city or county or whichever funding body. This person needs to attend all of the meetings. They have the same exact term limits and voting power as other members of the board. And the nice little caveat that I like to remind people is that the governing body representative can appoint a designee to be on the board instead of themselves. But again, that person has the same exact structure of their library board membership. Also, just going to take a minute to remind you, as always, that the library director is not a member of the library board in any capacity in any situation ever. Okay, 3-year terms. Trustees are appointed by the municipality that they're representing. The appointment should be recorded in the city or county meeting minutes. And then, I mean, typically the board is going to say, hey, city council, these are the new members to the library board that we would like you to appoint. Please do this at your next meeting. And it tends to be that simple. All terms are 3 years in length, and board members can serve 2 consecutive terms. So 3 plus 3, that's 6 years. Once those 2 terms have been served, they need to take 1 year off before being reappointed to the board. Again, this is laid out in Century Code, and this also applies for the city and county representative. They do not get to stay on the board indefinitely. They do have to take that 1 year off, and another representative or a designee needs to have a term. Last bullet on this slide, what to do with a vacant seat. Seat vacancies happen fairly commonly. So a trustee was either removed because of a process laid out in the board's bylaws, like they weren't participating enough, or they were unable to fulfill their original commitment. They don't have time anymore. I will say that board members cannot be removed by the city or county government officials unless they violate statute 440823, which is misconduct, malfeasance, crime in office, or neglect of duty, or for habitual drunkenness or gross incompetence. I'll leave that there. As per Century Code, an appointment to fill an unexpired term, it may be for the residue of the term only. So the state library asked our representative at the Attorney General's office to confirm that board members may only remain on the board for 1 term after they fill a vacant seat. Their exact verbiage was, the residue of the vacant seat is considered their first term. Okay, the roles on the board. The only role on the board that's actually required in Century Code is the role of the board president. The board president runs the meetings, they call the meeting to order, they attend to the items on the agenda, keep everybody on track. Other common roles would be the treasurer, who does a lot of the balancing of the books and signing checks, secretary, who records the minutes, and then the vice president, who is the assistant to the president, runs the meeting if they're not there. Each person on the board can have a role, or you could, for example, combine like the treasurer and secretary roles. No matter how you do this, it should be outlined in the bylaws of the board. And then, while not all board members are officers, all trustees are expected to attend meetings and participate actively. So this includes reading your board packet ahead of time, listening to everybody's reports, ask questions if you need clarifications. And then again, if board members disagree on a motion, that's okay, but everybody needs to remain respectful. And then once a motion passes, everybody needs to support that decision publicly to show a united front. I think that's really important. State Librarian Mary Susie thinks that's really important. I hope you all see the value in board members not publicly fighting about library business. So I've talked about the bylaws a little bit, but I kind of want to really dive into them. Century Code reads, the board of directors should have the following powers and duties: to make and adopt such bylaws, rules, and regulations relating to the duties of the officers of the board as may be expedient and not inconsistent with the provisions of this chapter. So basically, your board needs to have bylaws or rules that outline how the board is run and the roles of the board members. The absolute minimum of things they should include are listed on this slide. So legal provisions that create the library and the library board duties. So North Dakota Century Code 4038, the legal name of the library, pretty straightforward. Expectations of each board member, so their attendance requirements, their term limits by Century Code, the process of removing a board member for reasonable cause, how officers are chosen or elected and the length of an officer's term, and then the powers and responsibilities for each of those officers. You need meeting information. So how often are meetings held? How are they conducted? You need to define what a quorum is. So typically like a majority that can make a decision. The provisions for calling special meetings, and then a statement of the use of parliamentary procedure, which we'll get here in a few slides. The bylaws should also include information about the roles of the committees. So how a committee would be appointed, what they should do, and then a provision for the review and revision of the bylaws, so that when bylaws need to be updated and amended, there's a process laid out how to do that. That's a lot of stuff. I have examples of bylaws on the LibGuide I mentioned at the beginning. And then Oh, sorry, I got lost. The language of the bylaws needs to be really clear and unambiguous. I personally love reading bylaws and board documents. You can send them to me and I'll give you my 2 cents. But generally, imprecise language is going to result in a lot of confusion. So a lot of things that you need to be really clear on are going to be that committees have no legal authority. They're only advisory committees to the board, or board members and officers can only perform official actions on behalf of the board when they have specific authorization from the full board to do so. Otherwise, any official action needs to come from the full board. In summary, bylaws are really important and foundational to a well-run library board, and they guide how the board runs and operates. They should be as clear as possible. And so I encourage you to find your board's bylaws and read them if you don't know where they are, or just to refamiliarize yourself with them. And then look and see if there's anything that needs to be revised. Make sure everything in there is being followed and is correct and is how you want that board to be run. All right. Do we have any questions before we move on to the fun board meetings portion? Here in library development, we like to encourage all boards to hold a regular monthly meeting. This is not a statutory requirement. It's not in law, just a general recommendation. Monthly meetings make it easier for the board to discuss each month's bills, progress towards the library's goals. They can talk about conference attendance, grant acceptance, policies, all of these things that arise, and sometimes that can't wait 2 or 3 months. Some libraries only meet 4 or 8 times a year. Some take December off and only meet 11 times a year. Special meetings, which are outside of the regularly scheduled meetings, should be called as needed, but generally can be avoided by having a regular monthly meeting. And I think this is preferable. You may disagree with me, but we do have really fabulous open meeting laws in North Dakota. So again, I'm not a lawyer. Pretty much everything I'm about to say is verbatim from Century Code or the Attorney General's office. The definition of a meeting in North Dakota is, quote, any gathering of a quorum of the members of a governing body of a public entity regarding public business, end quote. So this includes formal meetings, committee and informal gatherings. And then an informal gathering might be like your holiday party or a wedding if a bunch of trustees are invited to somebody's weddings. I know how small towns work. You guys are probably together a lot. So trustees should never discuss library business outside of an official meeting. Otherwise, they are in violation of open meeting laws. If we really want to drive home the point, text messages and emails also fall under this law. So texts and emails about library business between library trustees violates the law because that is considered a meeting. Best practices indicate that all members of the board should attend meetings in person, but we are obviously living through interesting times, and there's also stipulations in Century Code that allow trustees to attend meetings via conference call or video, provided that their voice is on speakerphone. And there's currently legislation going through here, the House and Senate, to add additional verbiage about virtual meetings. So I don't want to get too much into how this could change, but it likely will be changing here pretty soon. So in case I need to say it absolutely explicitly, board meetings are open to the public as per Century Code 4404. It is the law that the public can attend your meetings. All right, friendly bullet points, public notice. If you hold regularly scheduled meetings, like most of your board meetings probably are, they need to be posted on the library's official website or filed with your city or county auditor. And information about the meeting notice needs to be given to anybody that requests it. In addition to the annual filing of regular meetings, prior written notice of all public meetings, including committees, needs to be given to the governing body. That includes date, time, location of the meeting, and then an agenda as soon as one is prepared, typically a week out. Regular meeting agendas can be added to or altered at the meeting. Special and emergency meeting agendas cannot be altered and need to be strictly adhered to. The notice to the governing body should occur at the same time as the notice to the public. And then the notice to the public needs to be posted at the library at the location of the meeting. If the meeting is not at the library, posted on the website or filed with the city county auditor and provided to any individual that has requested notice of the meeting. There is no minimum advance notice period for public meetings. And I know that I just probably said a lot of words that are kind of jumbled together in your brain. But generally, just make sure anybody that wants to know about your meeting has the ability to find out and make it as easy as possible. Public attendance. So a member of the public has the right to attend any open meeting and to record or broadcast that meeting. They do, however, not have the right to participate. I like to tell boards that it's in your library's best interest to allow the member of the public to speak, because otherwise it's really bad PR to say, I attended their meeting and they wouldn't let me talk. But you can limit the amount of time, and I just have to say it's not a right provided by Century Code that they get to speak at your meeting, only that they attend. Okay. We do have special circumstances where everything I just told you essentially changes, and that's for closed and special meetings. A special meeting is one that is not regularly scheduled, so it might be to sign a contract before a deadline, or something like that. So a closed meeting can only occur if certain criteria laid out in Century Code are met. In my past 3 years here, I've never had a board go into a closed meeting that I can think of. Additional requirements for closed and special meetings can be found linked in the LibGuide. Okay, so quick recap. Meetings occur when there is a quorum of the board to discuss public business, whether that is in person, teleconference, texting, or email. The public needs to have a notice and agenda of every single meeting. The public needs to be able to freely attend all of their meeting. Since the public cannot attend a text message or email chain, board members cannot text or email about public business because that is a violation of open meeting laws. How are we doing? Do we have any questions about this? I have a ton of Attorney General resources listed in the LibGuide that really walks through step by step. But if there's any questions, I can do my best to answer them. All right, seeing none.
Abby, I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
This is Jen Mouse in Lisbon again. If we are doing like an eval or a pay compensation discussion regarding our librarian, are we allowed to go into a closed session then so that it's not, that part isn't open to the public?
I do not believe so. There are very specific closed meeting stipulations, and it's essentially like consulting with an attorney.
Okay.
Yep.
No, thank you.
You're welcome. I can, again, point you towards like the exact things that are allowed, but it really is a limited thing. If you're discussing salary negotiations for like hiring somebody, that can be in a closed session.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right. Any others? All right. Let's talk about agendas. So as part of open meeting laws, you need to provide an agenda with your meeting notices. Agendas guide the meeting, make sure everything stays on track and is productive. It typically has the order that I have there on the slide. Other items that can be added to an agenda if it fits what your library is doing would be like a treasurer's report, report of committees, public comment. Your agenda isn't going to change much from meeting to meeting. It should be sent out in the board packet prior to the meeting, along with the previous month's minutes. The board packet is meant to be reviewed by all board members before the meeting. So everybody comes to the meeting prepared, ready to discuss, and people aren't like scrambling to read everything that they were supposed to read last week at the meeting. It really just keeps everybody on track. In a special meeting, agendas need to be strictly adhered to with absolutely no variations. The agenda you post is the agenda that is followed. And then again, if the board moves into a closed session, that needs to be noted in the agenda along with the statutory authority for doing so. But in general, at your regular meetings, after the call to order, the board can move to amend the agenda or approve it as is and go forward. I added this slide because it's a question I get a lot from library directors and library boards about like, how can their board meetings be more efficient? And honestly, following the agenda is one of the best things that your board can do, as is following like a really rigid parliamentary procedure, like Robert Rules of Orders. It helps navigate basic decorum, like motions, discussions, and votings. And then it's also the president's job to make sure that this discussion relates directly to the agenda topic at hand. If it gets too lengthy, the board can move to table a discussion to a later meeting. But if meetings run too long, they run the risk of not being productive at all. So following agendas is something I care about very passionately, and I believe it's in absolutely everybody's best interest. Robert's Rules of Orders, like I said, is like the most common parliamentary procedure. You've all probably heard of it. It's meant specifically to facilitate productive discussions. The rules can be modified to fit your board because following it exactly for each group is probably not going to work the best, but you should be consistent throughout all of your board meetings. It sounds really scary, especially if you get like parliamentary procedure for dummies. But we can kind of go through it pretty point by point here. The basic ground rules of Robert's Rules is to listen to whoever's talking and to keep all discussion items relevant to the agenda item that you're discussing. So if you're approving this month's bills, it would be appropriate to inquire about why are the programming bills so high for this month. But a discussion of if your children's librarian should have their own library credit card, that would not be relevant to this particular agenda item. It would need its own item. Motions are one of the most important parts of parliamentary procedure. They draw everyone back to the common focus and move the meeting forwards. So for every point on the agenda, there will likely be a motion, a second, a discussion, and then a vote. So I move to approve the minutes from the July board meeting as submitted. If anyone agrees, they say, I second the motion. Then it's open discussion. If there's no discussion, there's a vote for ayes and nays. If there is discussion, there can be a new motion or the motion would fail. So you could say, I move to approve the minutes from July with the changes discussed if there is a typo or something. It would be seconded and then taken to the vote. A more complex one might be like, I move to send the director and one part-time person to the NDLA conference this fall. Seconded, discussion might talk about staff coverage of the desk, if only the director should go, etc. Once discussion would finish, the motion goes to a vote. If the motion fails, a new motion could be raised. Say, I move to only send one staff member to the NDLA conference. Motion passes. That is the final decision of the board. All of the board members get to say, this is our decision together that we all agree upon. One of the strongest motions that somebody can make is a motion to table discussion. So if the conversation is going on for a long time and it's not being productive, a board member can call a motion to table the discussion until the next meeting or until more information is found out. This gives all board members time to think about the topic, come back fresh later when they do have time to discuss it more at length. I know that sometimes this isn't an option because things are timely, but it's a really useful motion for things like strategic planning or policy updates when those discussions can get really long. The last thing I want to talk about in regards to this is voting. So a board member will vote a board will vote and the meeting minutes will say something like motion passed unanimously. But Century Code requires that all non-procedural votes use a roll call vote. So this means each board member's vote is individually recorded in the minutes. So the minutes might read Abby, aye, Jerry, aye, Sam, nay, Joey, nay, Carla, nay. The vote fails with 2 ayes and 3 nays. That's a roll call vote, again, for all non-procedural, non-procedural votes. Okay, on to minutes. One of the most important parts of parliamentary procedure and Century Code is the creation and access of minutes for all public meetings. Minutes are meant to give clear pictures as to what went on at a meeting and record all the decisions made and what the votes were for. Minutes are required to be taken at all board meetings and committee meetings. According to Century Code 440418, minutes at a minimum need to include the names of all members attending the meeting, the location, the date and time the meeting was called to order, and then the time it was adjourned. It should have the topics discussed that regard public business, a description of each motion made at the meeting, whether it was seconded, the results of every vote, and the vote of each member on every roll call vote. A really good starting point, if you are the secretary, is to start with the agenda, since that's essentially the outline of your meeting. List the names of the board members and any other attendees, as well as if any board members were absent. And then list the date, location, call to order, and then kind of follow the agenda points. The minutes should absolutely not be a verbatim recording of every single thing that was discussed. A good rule of thumb is that if a board meeting lasts an hour, minutes can be 1 to 2 pages. Again, I have examples of minutes on the LibGuide, or else I encourage you to go and find your city or county's meeting minutes and look at those. They're very insightful and give you a good idea of what your meeting minutes can look like. There are exceptions to meeting rules for closed and executive sessions, like provisions for making an audio recording of closed sessions. If you find yourself in a situation where you think you need a closed session, again, I can get you the Century Code like stipulations from the Attorney General's office of what all needs to be done and the very specific circumstances they meet. Do we have any questions about meetings? Excellent. Now on to our very last topic for the day, which is open records. A lot of this is going to sound probably very familiar because all of this is related, right? So a record in the context that we're using it today is any recorded information. So emails, computer files, photos, text messages, memos, minutes, notes, salary, job performance records, contracts, telephone records, any record as it relates to how public funds are spent or with the public entity's performance of its governmental functions or its public business. This includes personal computers, cell phones, and email used for public business as well. So if you're using your personal cell phone to conduct public business, it may be open to an open records request. A record request, by default, is the right of anyone to view or receive a copy of a record. The main rules are that the library cannot ask why the records are requested or the name of the requester. Records can be requested in any medium, so somebody can call, it can be in person, the request can be in an email or an actual letter. The request needs to identify which specific records they are requesting, and the entity, the library, can delay acting upon the request while waiting for the requester to clarify which records they would specifically like. 2 main notes that the Attorney General makes are that the request for information is not a request for records, and that the library or entity does not have to respond to questions regarding the content of the records. They just have to provide the records. So once a records request is made, the library needs to provide the records in a, quote, reasonable time. There's stipulations in Century Code that the library doesn't need to convert records to any other format, compile records that don't exist, or obtain records from another entity that they don't currently have in their possession. And then the last stipulation is that there are really specific laws about charging for records requests. Essentially, the library can only charge 25 cents per page for printed material. For larger requests that take more than an hour of staff time, the library could charge additional fees as laid out in Century Code. Again, if you find yourself in this situation, I can direct you to the relevant statutes and Attorney General guidance. It sounds big and scary because it's important, but it's not typically as hard and scary as it sounds. There are a couple situations where record requests can be denied. So one is if the record doesn't exist. Seems pretty straightforward, but it's worth saying. And then if repeated requests for records disrupt the essential function of the library, you can refuse to provide access to the records. This needs to be put down in writing, and then the requester can seek an Attorney General opinion of whether or not the refusal violates the law. Records can be considered confidential or exempt by state or federal law. So if you would like to deny these requests, the library needs to cite the specific law that results in the record being exempt or confidential. So confidential records cannot be released unless the confidential information is redacted. So an example of that would be social security numbers, electronic passwords, employee medical treatment records, really, really personal stuff like that. Exempt records is where the library has a choice if they release it or withhold it. So it's not illegal to release an exempt record. The discretion is with the library if it is appropriate to release the information or not. Sometimes people call these closed records. Exempt information would be addresses, home and personal cell phone numbers, personal financial information, email addresses, things like that. There are 2 library-specific exemptions in Century Code. So 4404 18.23 is library, archive, and museum collections. And that one says that donor records can be withheld from the public for a specific amount of time if that is a consideration of the donation. And then there's 403812, which is records of library patron names or their information that could identify the patron, and information on the subject requested by the patron is exempt. However, records must be released pursuant to a court order or subpoena. We'll kind of talk about this on Tuesday, where that falls on like library ethics, but it's generally understood that the library should never release patron records without a court order. There's a lot more to exempting confidential records, but I don't think you need to listen to me talk about that for that long. So if you're interested, again, I can send more information to you. It's all linked on that LibGuide. But that kind of wraps us up for the day. I'll give you our contact information. If you have any questions, you can speak up or throw them in chat. I'm Abby Ebach, Public Library Specialist. Carmen Redding is our Library Services Division Director. And then Mary Susi is the North Dakota State Librarian.